All right, in this lecture, I'd like to look at citizenship, and as we've done several times prior, take some time to think about what the Bible says and try to think about citizenship as Christians, not so much as conservatives or Republicans or something along that stripe, but what does the Bible say? We'll look at several passages here, primarily in the Old Testament, but before we look at them in particular, let me give you four things I think we can see looking at the Old Testament law and how God arranged for strangers to be handled there. And then, without looking at a lot of passages, thinking about how God arranged for somebody to become a citizen of a church or a church member and what's required for that. I think there's some things, some principles we can pull out of that about citizenship in general. The first point is that foreigners should not be treated poorly. We'll read some passages about them not being vexed. The second thing is that if a foreigner wants to be a citizen, and this would be both in the Old Testament and coming into a church, if a foreigner wants to be a citizen, they should be willing to accept the philosophy of the country. You know, if you want to come and be an American, then you should buy into the American founding, the principles based on God's Word, the whole idea, the whole package. Accept the philosophy, and if you don't like the philosophy, then it doesn't make sense to try to be a citizen of that particular country. Find one that you can join into and accept the philosophy of. So a foreigner, if he wants to be a citizen, should accept the philosophy of the country. The third thing, new citizens are accepted on equal footing. There's not a two-tiered or multi-tiered system. If you're a citizen, you're a citizen. In the American system, we'll see that there's only one exception to that. A person who becomes a citizen after birth is naturalized. They can't be president. Other than that, complete equal footing. And then the fourth thing we can see here is citizenship is voluntary. It's something you willingly agree to. You're not forced into it. Most of us here in America today, or whatever country we're from, we're citizens of that country by birth. We didn't make some active decision to become citizens, but we do actively stay. And we could, in most cases, leave and become citizens of another country. That citizenship is a voluntary thing. It's not something forced on us. In history, there's been lots of examples of places where you didn't have that choice to leave, and the government did all they could to keep their citizens in and prevent them from escaping and getting to other countries. It was not a voluntary thing. If you think of the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries, it was not a voluntary citizenship. So those 4 points we can see. We'll look at some passages, and they come up here and there in the passages sometimes together, and I think we can see those as we look at them. All right, let's start off in Leviticus 19, down in verse 33. We see this, pretty straightforward. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not vex him. Pretty easy. Don't vex the stranger. Don't treat them harshly. Don't be cruel to them. Don't vex them. Verse 34 continues the thought about vexing. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself. For ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So God even bringing back to their memory the fact that they had been strangers and had been vexed. They had been treated harshly in Egypt, and God reminding them what it's like to be that foreigner and to treat somebody kindly, not to vex them. If you've ever traveled to a country that doesn't speak English, it's amazingly refreshing to bump into somebody that speaks English or a language that you know. And all of a sudden there's a bond there. It's hard to appreciate what it's like to be that foreigner in a strange land and have somebody treat you nicely. So they should not vex the stranger. We can see that same idea of vexed brought up in Exodus 22:21 and then Exodus 23:9, and I'm sure other places. Exodus 23:9 talks about not oppressing the stranger. The same idea, shouldn't be treated poorly. All right, another cluster of verses here we can look at, and the basic thought here is that strangers had to follow the law in most cases. They couldn't come in and claim that their home country allowed for this or that and just ignore the laws. They had to follow the law. I'm going to flip here to Leviticus 18:26. Ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations. Just a general instruction about keeping all the law. Neither any of your own nation, nor any stranger that sojourneth among you. So if there's a stranger that was staying and living there, he was expected to keep and follow the law, just like them. So to follow the law in most cases. There are a few times where there's some special considerations made for them being strangers. Let's flip back to, back to Leviticus 17. I'll read verse 12. Therefore I say unto the children of Israel, no soul of you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that sojourneth among you eat blood. So the same rules applying. Verse 15. And every soul that eateth that which dieth of itself, or that which was torn with beasts, whether it be one of your own or a stranger, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. Then shall he be clean. So, of your own country or a stranger. The rules applying. We can look and see instruction about blasphemy and the punishment for that, and strangers, offering by fire, and strangers, keeping the Sabbath, the well-known passage in Exodus 20 in the middle of the Ten Commandments. 20 verse 10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath day of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. So the foreigners keeping the Sabbath. So the point is that these rules that God set up apply to them as well. They had to follow the law in most cases. All right, there were some special considerations made for them. And let's just look at a couple of passages there so we can see the types of things there where there are some special considerations made. Leviticus 23:22 says, and when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not make clean riddance of the corners of thy field when thou reapest. Neither shalt thou gather any gleaning of thy harvest. Thou shalt leave them unto the poor and to the strangers. So here these foreigners were allowed to glean with the poor in the land. So they're made account of slightly differently. Leviticus 25 talks about a Jew selling himself to a stranger. 25:47 and 48. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother that dwelleth by him wax poor, and sell himself unto the stranger, or sojourner by thee, or to the stock of the stranger's family, after that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. So if a Jew sells himself to a stranger, a foreigner, someone else can buy him back. It can finish as one of his brethren and may redeem him. So a little different consideration there. And one last here, just to round out some examples of strangers being recognized, not citizens, just living there, slightly different. Deuteronomy 23:20. Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brethren thou shalt not lend upon usury. So talking about taxing. If a stranger or foreigner borrows money, they could tax them, but they could not tax a fellow, they could charge interest, but unto a fellow Jew they could not charge interest. So they had to follow the law in most places. They were strangers, they weren't to be vexed, but they also weren't running roughshod and ignoring all of the rules and restrictions and things that God had set up. All right, the next cluster of things here talks about strangers not being allowed to do some of the religious things. There are some the parts of the worshiping they were not allowed to partake in. And let's start down. Let's go to Leviticus 22, Leviticus 22:10. There shall no stranger eat of the holy thing. A sojourner of the priest or an hired servant shall not eat of the holy thing. The priest and others could, but the stranger was not allowed to do that. Numbers 1:51 talks about the stranger not coming nigh to the tabernacle when it's being assembled or taken down, and they were to be killed, executed, if they did that, if strangers doing that. One passage I like to look at is Exodus 12:43. Wrong way. Exodus 12:43 and 48 Here, this is a passage about keeping the Passover, which I think most would be familiar with the importance of that ritual, symbolizing the time in Egypt and the passing over and the firstborn being spared. If a stranger wanted to partake in that, they were required to be circumcised. This is Leviticus 12:43. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the ordinance of the Passover. Thou shalt no stranger eat thereof." And then down in verse 48, continuing the discussion of the Passover, it says, "And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord." Here we can think of, we're talking about citizenship in general, they wanted to be full members in society, wanted to partake in the Passover, the very sacred part. And if that happens, God tells us, "Let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof." So circumcision, we know, is part of the covenant between the Jews and God. Very, very important symbolically. If we think back to our list of things at the top, they would be accepting the philosophy of the people if they wanted to partake here in the Passover. Okay, so there was some consideration made for them, and if they wanted to partake in the Passover and be just as one born in the land, like a natural-born citizen, they had to be circumcised. Okay, so there in the Old Testament, we can see, I think, these things fairly clearly brought out. Let's think of the New Testament. We won't look at a whole bunch of passages there, but if we just think about the church in the New Testament, to become a member of the church, or become a citizen of the church, right, you have to be saved. We could think of that paralleling accepting the philosophy of the country. Right? You have to be baptized, relatively simple thing to do, and then you're accepted on equal footing. Right? There's not a charter member status and then a less than 10-year status. You're a member of the church. So we could also think about it being voluntary. We don't run through the streets with guns and force people to be members of our church. It's a voluntary thing. And then foreigners aren't treated poorly. People are welcome to come and visit. If they're not going to disrupt the services and cause problems, we want them to come. We want them to come and hear the gospel. So even as God arranged the New Testament church, we can see these ideas brought out about citizenship. So a foreigner's not treated poorly. If a foreigner wants to be a citizen, accept the philosophy. New citizens accepted on equal footing, and then citizenship is voluntary. Voluntary. I think we can at least get those ideas, at least as principles, about citizenship from the Bible. All right, now let's shift gears as we get into the second part of our lecture. And let's think about the Constitution and think about our system in America and how the rules operate and just how does citizenship work here? How do you become a citizen if you're not? And just some of the details of that. First thing I'd like to talk about is the Constitution. The Constitution says a lot about citizens, things they can or can't do. But for a long time, for a lot of the Constitution, it doesn't really specify what a citizen is. It does, in Article 1, specify that Congress controls the naturalization process, the process of a foreigner becoming a citizen. That's one of the powers given to Congress. And that is given to Congress to control that. The president can't arbitrarily just wave a magic wand, or as he says today, use his pen and his phone and make citizens. States can't do it arbitrarily. The naturalization process goes through Congress. But other than that, there's nothing there to define a citizen until after the Civil War, when we get the 14th Amendment. And there it uses this phrase, "All persons born or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction of America are citizens." This was in the wave of amendments following the Civil War. It was aimed at the southern states not treating the freed slaves as citizens. And this is making it clear. Somebody born here or naturalized, and most of the slaves at this point were born here, then they were citizens by birth. All right, so it's aimed at that. But it brings up 3 points that I think are worth reiterating. Born here. If you're born here, you're a citizen. The second thing is naturalized. go through whatever process Congress sets up, then you're a citizen. And then the third one that gets forgotten, that applies really to both. Be subject to the jurisdiction. You be willing to live under and abide by the laws of this country. All right. Today we hear a lot about illegal immigrants coming into the country and having children, and then those children being citizens, and people claim the first statement, born here. They forget the subject to the jurisdiction. The parents that are having these children are just by very definition not subject to the jurisdiction. They're disobeying the law. So anyway, the courts have ruled today that this is the way it is, but I think actually just looking at the words of the Constitution, it does not mandate that children of people that come in here illegally become citizens. It doesn't mean we have to, enslave them or treat them harshly, but the Constitution does not mandate that they become citizens, as the courts have ruled that. So that's what the Constitution is. We get a definition, at least, of citizenship there. That's not until 1868, I believe, that we get that. I'm going to write in that time frame. We get now a constitutional definition. Prior to this, basically, if a state accepted you, you were a citizen. And that was the issue, southern states not allowing the freed slave to be citizens, and we had to get that changed. All right, now let's think about what the law actually says. We looked at the Bible, looked at the Constitution, and what it says briefly. Now I want to look at the U.S. law code, and without reading all of the details, just think about what it says and try to get a basic understanding of how the law actually works in America. All right, the first point, the first group of things to think about is citizens who are citizens by birth, natural-born citizens. And there's two categories, at least as I've got it split up in my notes, to think about here. The first, we already mentioned, all children born in the United States or its territories are citizens. That's very straightforward. If you're born here, you're a citizen. The law does have some exceptions. I think some very common sense exceptions. Things like children of foreign diplomats, children born to enemy troops that are occupying U.S. territory. There are some exceptions like that in the law code. Basically, if you're born here, you're a citizen unless you fall into one of those rare circumstances. All right, the other piece here of natural-born citizen is children who are born to U.S. parents outside of America. They're not born on U.S. soil. Maybe they're working, their dad works for a company and he's in France when the child is born, or wherever. Children of U.S. citizens born outside America. And here there's two things to think about. The first one is if both parents, both mom and dad, are citizens, then the kid is a citizen. Automatically there's nothing to do, no paperwork to fill out, they're a citizen. Right. If only one parent is a citizen, I have it worded this way in my notes, then the situation is not as clear. Right. In almost all cases, or in many cases, the child can be a citizen, can be considered a natural-born citizen, but it's not automatic. All right. Even in the cases where the kid is a natural-born citizen, the parents have to keep custody of the kid, and they got to fill out the paperwork and establish permanent residence in the U.S. There's some things to jump through to establish that permanent residence. That natural-born citizenship status. But most cases, it can be done, but the kid has to, or the parents have to go through a few hoops. Let me mention just in particular a couple of things that I think are significant. One is that the kid has to live in a legal and physical custody of the American citizen. Right? If we have a couple having a child and they get divorced and the husband goes off and he's not a citizen and takes the child, then that child can't become a U.S. citizen, is not considered natural born. If the mom keeps the child, then the process can continue. So live in a legal and physical custody of the American citizen. All right, and the second thing I want to mention is that the kid has to be admitted as a lawful permanent resident. All right, if something's happened where the U.S. wouldn't allow him to come in just as a permanent resident, then it definitely brings a question about whether or not he would be accepted as a citizen. So there's a few things like that the parents, if they're wanting him to be a U.S. citizen, a natural-born citizen, they just have to just make sure they keep inside those parameters, and it will happen. They will get their child will become a citizen. That the particular law that governs this right now is the Traveled Citizen Act of 2000. As far as I know, that hasn't been changed. All right, so that would be children born to parents outside the U.S. Both parents a citizen, no question. One a citizen, little bit to think about there. In most cases, the child can be a natural-born citizen with a little bit of assistance. All right, the other piece of the U.S. law we wanted to look at, we looked at citizenship by birth. The other piece is citizenship by naturalization, becoming a citizen. You were born as a citizen to another country, and you want to become a citizen in America. And what has to happen? What I have here is a list of 9 total things here, kind of in chronological order, that you would have to do this. And this is not meant to be exhausted or to walk somebody through the process, but at least to give us an idea of the types of things that Congress has set up for somebody who wants to become a U.S. citizen to do. Okay, the first one, lawful entry as a permanent resident. That person has to be allowed into the country as a permanent resident, not a student visa, not a tourist visa, allowed to come and just live indefinitely, legally here indefinitely, permanent resident. All right, that has to happen. A lot of people who are here illegally, this is the hurdle, right? They weren't admitted as a permanent resident. And in most cases, they need to go back to their home country and apply for this. And once they get admitted, then they can start the process. Right? So permanent residence, lawfully enter as a permanent residence. That would be the first step. Okay? The second thing is continuous residence in the U.S. for at least 5 years. Right? Maintain your residency here. There's another step, actually 2 down at step 4, but we can mention here is physical presence in the U.S. And these two, to most non-lawyers, seem like they're one and the same. But technically there's some differences here. But the basic thought with both continuous residence and physical presence is that you actually have to live here. Right? You can't enter as a permanent resident and then go back to Saudi Arabia and live there and file your petitions through the mail. You have to actually be living here. The continuous residence would be more the legal residence, and physical presence is your body actually here. Right? You have to be here. And there are some restrictions. The basic rule of thumb is at least half the time frame, and there's some restrictions about how long it could be all in one chunk that you can be gone. But maintain your residence here. If you want to be a citizen here, I think that's not an unreasonable expectation. All right, so at least as far as my breakdown, that would be 1, 2, and 3. All right, the continuous and physical presence being 2 different things. All right, the third or fourth thing here would be physically present here for the 3 months prior to filing your petition, to actually fill out the paperwork and send it in to become a citizen. Living here for the 3 months prior to that. You can't fly in from another country, fill it out, and go back. You have to be physically present here during that time frame. All right, the next step is read, write, and speak good English. You're wanting to come in and be a citizen here. You should be able to demonstrate that you can understand English. Read, write, and speak it. And there's a test that they're given, not especially, we wouldn't, I don't think, sweat it too much. There are some exceptions to that. People that have been here for a long time as permanent residents, this can get waived, or if you're above a certain age, this can get waived. So there's some exceptions, but for most people, speaking English is a requirement. And again, if we think back to understanding the philosophy of the country and accepting the philosophy, this isn't an outrageous thing to speak English. All right, another step is to display knowledge of the U.S. history and the basics of our government. Understand the basics of our history and understand how our government operates, the voting process, the Congress, the president, the courts, a basic understanding of that whole system. There's a short test they're given, just an examination to see about that. we should pass that pretty readily, but I've heard of lots of cases of just average people in the street that are U.S. citizens being stopped and being given this test and flunking it. But it's not outrageous. Knowledge of our country, not outrageous to think. All right, the next step, number 7 on my list, is good moral character. All right, you have to, if you're applying for citizenship and you're robbing banks and you maintain physical presence here because you're in jail, you can't possibly leave, then you're going to have problems getting through this time. You've got to maintain good moral character. The 8th step is continuous residence all through this time. We talked before about continuous residence for 5 years before you apply. I may not have said the 5 years, but 5 years was that time frame. If you are a spouse, then it drops to 3 years. But continuous residence then, after you send in your petition and start the process, you have to maintain that. You can't at that point then go back to your home country. You have to maintain your residence here all through the time frame. All right, and then the last thing here is more of it's not in chronological order at all, but you have to be 18. And that 18 would be the time that you file your paperwork. You can come and start your 5 years of continuous residence prior to that, but at least 18 to file the paperwork to become a U.S. citizen, a naturalized U.S. citizen. All right, so that is just the way Congress has set it up. It doesn't seem outrageous for us to, some reasonable things here for people to understand our culture and our Constitution, speak English, some reasonable things there, and reasonable restrictions about actually living here and maintaining a residence and not being a criminal and that type of thing. So not outrageous. But it is just what Congress has set up. There's nothing in the Constitution mandating all these steps. This is what Congress has set up. Okay, that was all the naturalization processes Congress has set it up. I want to just mention 2 other things involved with naturalization. The first is, it is possible for Congress to have a collective naturalization, where they just take a whole group of people and just by special law make them all citizens. The Native American Indians were wrapped in this way, all became citizens as a group in one fell swoop. And the other thing is that these citizens are accepted on equal footing. There's not some special notation on your passport if you're a naturalized citizen, and you only get so much protection if you ever... No, you're equal footing. We mentioned before that they're not allowed to be president, but other than that, equal footing. And again, president, I think, is a reasonable restriction. If you think about the power and influence that he has, we want to, as much as possible, get somebody there who truly understands what America is and is out to defend it. All right, so that is a little bit about the law in America and what it says about being born a citizen, a natural-born citizen, and becoming naturalized. And that's just the law that can be changed by Congress if we wanted it. All right, there's just a few things here I want to mention to wrap up citizenship. I'd like to talk about rights and responsibilities of citizens. I'd like to just mention briefly some ways to lose our citizenship according to the U.S. law, and then think about some ways to lose the privileges that come with being a citizen. So just 3 things here. First of all, rights and responsibilities. We hear a lot, especially in modern times, about rights. I have my rights. I have a right to this, a right to that. It's especially aggravating if you think about the declaration that says these rights come from God, and then hear people saying that the Constitution gives people a right to gay marriage. The Declaration is the philosophical framework that is the foundation for the Constitution, and they're claiming that they have a right from God to gay marriage or a right from God to kill an unborn child. It's extremely aggravating to hear about that. But even things that aren't quite so outrageous, we have rights, we have rights, we have rights. Okay, it is often forgotten that we also have responsibilities. Right? We're citizens of a country. Hopefully, in your family at home, as a citizen of your family, you had some rights. You got to eat meals there. You got to sleep in a bed. And also some responsibilities. You had to wash dishes. You had to mow the lawn. You had to participate in the chores to keep the house running well. Right? In the same vein, there are rights there are responsibilities that we have here in America, and a lot of them dovetail with some right. We have some right, and then stemming straight out of that is a responsibility. And those go hand in hand often. Let me just give you a couple examples. We have a right to vote, participate in the government, help choose our leaders. And that would be the right. The responsibility we have is we need to do a good job. We need to be informed. We need to vote. We actually need to go exercise that right. We need to know what the candidates stand for. Be aware of what's going on. A right and responsibility together. We have the right to peaceably assemble in the Constitution. A right. The responsibility would be to actually peaceably assemble. If you get together with a bunch of friends and get a permit to meet in town for some meeting and you start destroying property, you're going to lose that right. They're going to come and arrest you, and next time that you want to apply to peaceably assemble, very likely you're going to be denied because you did not exercise the responsibility that goes with that right. Again, one that's dear to my heart, the right to keep and bear arms. I enjoy shooting and firearms. That's the right. There's also a big responsibility that comes with that. Right? A gun is a dangerous thing. And we have the right, we have the responsibility to use them properly, to keep them out of children's hands that don't know what they're doing with them, keep them out of criminals' hands. The responsibility with a concealed carry permit of carrying it and being willing to use it responsibly. There's some heavy responsibility that goes there. We often champion the right. We should just as strongly champion the responsibility to use that thing properly. All right, we can go on and talk about other things like free speech. There's a corresponding responsibility that goes with that. A free press. The press, they claim the freedom of the press. It's in the Constitution. But that puts a heavy load of responsibility on them. They better use that properly. We're seeing that, unfortunately, misused a lot today, especially before the advent of the internet and the access to information that provides. We saw a lot of the mainstream press abuse that position and not use it very well. All right, so there's rights and responsibilities that go together. So I also have here a list of, I just have it titled Duties of Citizens, or we could just hear Responsibilities of Citizens. Things that if you're a citizen of our country, you should do. It's part of being a citizen. And let me just kind of read down through the list here. Most of it's self-explanatory. Be loyal to America. This is your country. Be loyal at your house. If you started cheering for the neighbor all the time, hoping that they get the upper hand on your family, you're not going to sit very well at the dinner table. There's going to be some strife. Be loyal to America. We have an obligation or duty or responsibility to pay taxes. Right? Nobody likes that. But we like to be able to pick up the phone and call 911 and have the cops show up. We like that, and we would demand the right to have that. Well, that takes money. Pay our taxes. We like to think of our military protecting us. Takes money. Those guys need paid. They need weapons. They need expensive weapons and a lot of ammo to practice. All right, they need to be transported all over the country, all over the world. All right, pay our taxes. If you travel overseas and have gotten in trouble, or got not arrested, but somehow stranded or had problems, you can go to the U.S. Embassy and they're going to help you. If you did get arrested and put in jail someplace, especially unfairly, you can lean on the U.S. government and expect them to come to your aid. And it takes money. Pay our taxes. We have another duty or responsibility to obey the law. We're citizens. You should obey the law. It should be more than just out of your responsibility as a citizen. It should be your responsibility as a citizen of heaven, God's family, that you obey the law. But either way, a responsibility to help enforce the laws. All right? And all you guys are thinking, yes, I'm going to be the guy that drags the bank robber down on the streets and holds him for the cops. That would be included, but much less dramatic things we can do. Things like serve on a jury. Right? That's a headache. I've never gotten to do it. I really would like to sometime. But I know other people that have, and they're missing 3 or 4 days of work. And for us, it was a federal court driving to Crown Point, about 45 minutes away, back and forth every day. A headache. But we all, if we're on trial, we want the right to a jury trial. Well, then we should fulfill their responsibilities. Somebody's got to serve on the jury. What about being an honest witness? You see a crime, you should be willing to testify. I've recently heard in Chicago of the murders taking place there. The biggest problem that the cops have, they said, is that nobody will tell them anything. People saw the crime, neighbors, others in the street. Nobody's willing to testify. Nobody's willing to be a witness. Those same people will complain that the cops never do anything. Right? They're willing to champion their rights, but not willing to bear the responsibility. Be an honest witness. So help enforce the laws. There's things like that. It's not always convenient, but when we're called upon, we should be willing to do it. Okay, another duty we have is protect the Constitution. It's just a piece of paper, all right? Nothing magical about it. It can't stand up and yell when it's been violated. It's our job to stand up and yell when it's been violated. Protect that thing. I already mentioned this one, the right to vote, or the responsibility to vote. We should do that. We should be aware of what's happening in the government. Right? You could immerse yourself in this and get way, way overboard. But you should be aware. What's the president doing? What laws is Congress passing? In Indiana, what laws is our state legislature passing? Right now, they're floating laws that could require any public institution, schools, even our church ultimately, and if people would have it, to recognize gender identity, whatever gender people want to claim. We'd have to let them use that bathroom. Right? There are laws floating through our state legislature along that vein. We should be aware of it. And we should not just keep it in our head. We should be willing to talk about it. We should be willing to talk to our representatives about it. Keep aware of what's going on. If you don't keep abreast some, then you'll have no idea and just get blindsided with things. We should be aware. It's part of our responsibility of being a citizen. And one more on my list, I'm sure there's many others, serve in the army if needed. Okay, I think many, I know I do, love to read books about World War II, or right now I'm reading about a Navy SEAL that was involved with the Bin Laden raid when he was killed. And we think, man, these guys are great. It's fun to read about them. Somebody's got to be that soldier. And if it's needed, you think back to World War II, a lot of people had to go and fight. It wasn't in their schedule. They didn't, as a 5-year-old, say, man, I hope I can go to Iwo Jima. It'd be great. But they were willing to go. Part of their responsibility of being a citizen. All right, so some duties, some responsibilities of citizenship. We often forget about that. One last thing here under these rights and responsibilities is I want to think about the church briefly. Here we have what role does the church have? Now, I'm not here trying to, and we know the church is here to win souls and help us live as Christians, not that, but in this realm of citizenship, really the church should produce good citizens. We as Christians should be good citizens. We have an institution here that's ordained by God, and He's given us a job to fulfill in it, just like He's instituted the family and has given us a job there. He's instituted the church and given us a job there. He's also instituted government and given us a job there. And as Christians, we should be busy. We should be part of it. It shouldn't be the only thing we're involved in for most of us, but we do have a responsibility, and members of a good church should be the best citizens. It should be producing good citizens. So, all right, the church and citizens. All right, next, a little minutia of the U.S. Law Code, ways to lose citizenship. All right, now I'm going to list off some things here that are all in Section 348 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. I'm not worried about you knowing this list of things, but I'm going to read them to you. But with this thing in mind, it's stated that any of these actions have to be performed voluntary with the intention of relinquishing your U.S. citizenship. All right? It really is a difficult thing. There's some things in here that you can do, and if you're not intending to give up your U.S. citizenship, then you can do these things and not be giving it up. Right? You're not going to accidentally lose your citizenship. You might let your driver's license expire and not realize it or something. That's not going to happen with your U.S. citizenship. I think we might have gone a little bit overboard on making it difficult to give it up, but this is what it is. All right, intentionally relinquishing it. Here's just a list of things out of the law code. Obtaining naturalization in a foreign state. You can go and apply to be a citizen of another country, and if you're not intending to give up your U.S. citizenship, then you're not, and the courts have ruled you can be both. I don't think that makes sense, but the courts have ruled that. The courts have ruled a lot of things that don't make sense. You can take an oath or affirmation to a foreign state. Work as a member of the officials' administration or something. You take an oath or affirmation. You can do that and not give up your citizenship necessarily. You can serve in the armed forces of a foreign state. All right? And as long as you do that and are not intended to give up your citizenship, you would not necessarily. You can accept employment for a foreign state. And then conviction for an act of treason. You can have it stripped for you there potentially. And then the last thing here to mention in the law code is if you want to give it up, if you're saying, I'm sick of it, I want to leave the country, be a citizen someplace else, you would have to formally go to a U.S. consular office outside of the States and there renounce it. You couldn't just go to the wall around the consular's office and throw your passport over and say, I'm sick of it, I don't want to be a citizen. You would have to formally do this. There would be paperwork and things to fill out, making this a formal thing, not just you yelling about it. So you would have to do that to give it up. So it's a very, very deliberate thing to do to give up your citizenship. Not going to happen by accident. All right, the very last thing to mention is some ways to lose the privileges or maybe the rights of being a citizen. How can we lose these things? Just want to mention three things. The first is conviction of a crime. You rob a bank, get thrown in jail. There's all kinds of rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution that you no longer have access to. All right, you're stripped of them. You can't vote. You can't own a firearm. You can't travel freely. You've given them up. Conviction of a crime. That would be a way to lose the privileges. You're still a citizen, but you don't have the privileges that you had. Second way would be to misuse them. We mentioned before about peaceably assembling. We have a right to no excessive bail. Right? You get arrested for something, you put up some money to guarantee you're going to come back to court. If you skip out and don't come back to court and they hunt you down and bring you back, you're going to get some excessive bail. It's going to go higher because you've misused that privilege. All right, so misusing them is a way to lose them. And then the last one is through neglect. Never, ever exercising them. I think the most glaring one here would be voting. All right, if we never vote, then we're going to let the world and unsaved folks pick our leaders for us, and we're going to see these things stripped away. But this would apply other places. We have a right to keep and bear arms. If nobody in the country ever buys a gun, we're going to see that shrivel up and be gone. All right, so neglect is another way to lose some of the privileges of being a citizen. All right, so we've seen, starting out here, what the Bible says. 4 general points about citizenship, and then looked into the U.S. Constitution, and then some of the law and just general philosophy about what it means to be a citizen, especially a good citizen of a country. Thank you very much.